Balaam was a prophet mentioned in the Bible who, despite his actions, truly heard God and received true prophecies. However, his heart was not in sync with God, and he ended up betraying Israel, leading the people astray. Who really was Balaam, and what can we learn from this story? It all began when the Israelites were on the plains of Moab. They had already faced many enemies and won several battles. Despite historical ties, they were prevented from passing through Edom, a descendant of Esau, Jacob's brother. After a victory over Edom and Moab, they camped near the Jordan River, from where they could see the Promised Land. But not everything was easy. Peoples of Ammon and Moab, who had lands near the Promised Land, decided to disrupt the plans of the Israelites. To do this, they hired a Syrian diviner named Balaam. Balaam was famous for cursing armies that were then defeated. The Israelites reached the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan, opposite Jericho. This is where the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua begin. But before the more famous events, the following chapters of Numbers speak about Balak and Balaam. Balak, son of Zippor and king of Moab, was terrified by the number of Israelites. Afraid, he called Balaam, son of Beor, to curse the people of Israel, hoping that this way he could defeat them. Balak sent messengers to Balaam, who lived near the Euphrates River, asking for his help. He knew that whom Balaam blessed was blessed, and whom he cursed was cursed. Balak's request was simple: curse the Israelites so that Moab could defeat them. Balaam, known for achieving results with his words, was called for this task. But God always keeps his promises, had other plans. Balaam's story shows how God keeps his promises and protects his people. Long ago, God promised Abraham that he would become a great nation, blessing those who blessed him and cursing those who despised him. These promises extended to Abraham's descendants, the Israelites. When the Israelites were near the Promised Land, Balak, king of Moab, was terrified. He knew he could not face the people of Israel alone. So he sent for Balaam, a diviner known for cursing and blessing successfully. Balaam, even practicing forbidden forms of magic, decided to consult God before making any decision. God came to Balaam and made it clear that the Israelites were blessed and that he should not curse them. Even with tempting offers, Balaam followed God's guidance and refused to curse Israel. Balak, desperate, sent more numerous and important messengers with promises of great rewards. Once again, Balaam consulted God, who allowed him to go, but with the condition of speaking only what God commanded. On the way, Balaam's donkey saw the angel of the Lord with a sword in hand and turned aside, saving Balaam's life. The animal even spoke, questioning why Balaam was mistreating it. Only then did God open Balaam's eyes to see the angel and understand the gravity of the situation. God allowed Balaam to continue, but with the clear instruction to speak only God's word. When Balaam finally met Balak, he made it clear that he would only say what God commanded, despite all the pressures and offers from Balak. This story shows that when God decides to bless, no one can change that, no matter how hard they try. God always keeps his promises and protects those who are faithful to him. Balak was not happy at all. He paid Balaam to curse Israel, but instead, he heard blessing after blessing. Balaam, despite being a known diviner, could not just make something up. God put words in his mouth, and that is what he repeated, whether Balak liked it or not. When Balaam returned to Balak, he said he had prepared 7 altars, each with a bull and a ram. Then he proclaimed what God had commanded. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? I see a people who live apart and do not consider themselves as other nations, who can count the dust of Jacob or number even a fourth of Israel. Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like theirs. Balak was furious, shouted, I brought you to curse my enemies, but you have only blessed them. Balaam replied, I can only speak what the Lord puts in my mouth. But Balak did not give up easily. He thought that maybe a change of scenery would help. He took Balaam to another place and repeated the ritual of the 7 altars and sacrifices. Again, Balaam went aside to hear God, who once again put words in his mouth. When Balaam returned, he said, Arise, Balak, and hear. God is not human to lie, nor a human being to change his mind. He promised and will fulfill. I received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot change it. There is no misfortune in Jacob, nor misery in Israel. The Lord their God is with them. God brought them out of Egypt. They have the strength of a wild ox. There is no magic that works against Jacob, nor charms against Israel. People will say, see what God has done. Balak was frustrated. He said, if you cannot curse them, at least do not bless them. But Balaam replied, I must do exactly what the Lord commands me. Still, Balak tried one last time. He took Balaam to another place, hoping that this time God would allow the curse. They repeated the 7 altars and sacrifices. Balaam sought the word of the Lord, but the result was the same: blessing for Israel. Despite all attempts and promises of reward, Balaam could not go against God's will. Each new attempt by Balak only resulted in more blessings for Israel. It was clear that when God decides to bless, no one can change that, no matter how hard they try. Balaam, the prophet, was famous for his abilities, but God had other plans for him. King Balak paid a lot of money for Balaam to curse Israel, but every time Balaam tried, only blessings came out. The story is quite different, because even Balaam's donkey tried to warn him, refusing to walk because it saw an angel on the way. Balaam hit the donkey, and the animal started to talk. It might sound like a movie, but the lesson was clear. Even a donkey knew more about the situation than Balaam. When Balaam saw that God wanted to bless Israel, he set aside his old practices and looked towards the desert. There he saw Israel camped, and the Spirit of God took over him. He then began to speak. How beautiful are your tents, Jacob, your dwellings, Israel. They spread out like gardens beside a river, like trees planted by the Lord, like cedars by the waters. Water will flow from their buckets. Their seed will have abundant water. Their king will be greater than Agag. Their kingdom will be exalted. Even seeing Israel as a city of tents, Balaam described it as a land of abundance and prosperity. He mentioned that Israel's king would be greater than Agag, a name that would reappear in history with King Saul and the prophet Samuel. Balaam emphasized God's power in bringing Israel out of Egypt and defeating enemy nations. He concluded with a message that resonated strongly. Those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse them will be cursed. Balak, of course, was furious. He called Balaam to curse his enemies, but heard blessings instead, 3 times. Balak sent Balaam away without paying him, but Balaam calmly replied that he could only speak what God commanded. Before leaving, he still delivered one more prophecy about Israel's future and warnings about the fate of the surrounding nations. Thus, Balaam and Balak parted ways, with Balak not getting what he wanted, and Balaam knowing that one cannot go against God's will. If this biblical story has impacted you, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. Like the video, because by doing so, more people will be reached by this message of faith.